Hey there. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Shared Practices podcast. This episode is going to be a little different and a little longer as well, where I am talking to a group of dental students on the Business Minded Dentist podcast, where we are going to be going through sort of lots of questions about dental school, getting into ownership, early ownership, preparing for ownership. And, they had a group of great questions. We talked for a little over an hour. And so I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I thought it was a great one.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, George, for coming on. We started this podcast maybe 8 to 10 months ago. It was just me and Ben. And we started with the mindset of we just want to be sponges and soak up as much as we possibly can before we get into the situation where we're looking to buy a dental practice. Because, there's a lot of people out there that don't put in the work up front and then get hurt on the back end. So, that's the mindset we went into. And then, now we're at this point where we're interviewing one of the best to ever do it. So we know you have a ton of experience. And so, it's just an honor getting to talk to you. So one of the first questions I have is, I've heard you mention multiple times on your podcast how, shared practices is able to take a client's practice in the first year and grow it by about 37%. And so we're kind of just wondering, what are a few of the, common spots that you see in a practice that maybe isn't doing well, and you say, hey, this practice can grow pretty well in that first year. And then you're able to flip those around. And then in the first year, you grow it a significant amount.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. And I will answer your question, and I will remind the audience of your question. But first, I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent, and then I'll get to it. So right before we got on air, I was telling these guys that, dental school is that time of your life where you're putting in a lot of the work and you're not getting a lot of the reward. And so I commend you guys for taking the time to start this podcast, because like you guys talked to me about, I was podcasting as a dental student as well. And one of the really cool things is you build connections with people in the industry who know a lot. And then you talk to them on air, but then you build relationships with them where they share more with you off air. And so for me, this was one of the big things that helped me develop my career. So I just want to kind of start by tipping my hat to you guys and saying, like, I recognize that what you're doing, there's a lot of work that goes in before you record, after you record, and all of the between. And I love people who have a passion for business and dentistry. And second point is, so I recently wrote Dental Moneyball Zero. I know that you arranged the lunch and learn at the University of Kentucky, so you know all about the book. And you got your copy.
Yes,
and there it is. Look at that right there. There's my copy. So the thing that I learned in doing research for that book is that private practice is changing. And the way that it's changing is there's the extremes are starting to come out, where there are more and more dentists who are making less than they did as associates, as owners. Like, I never heard that 9 years ago when I got on air. Like, I got on the Shared Practices podcast 9 years ago, and I've been talking about practice management for the last 9 years. And that was a foreign concept 9 years ago. Now it's like 30-40% of people who get into ownership make less. And so, like, I say that to just start the conversation with, this is why what Elijah said at the beginning is very important, is that you need to put in that time and that effort in the front end, so that if you're going to take on the burden of ownership and take it into private practice, that you put yourself in a position where you're going to succeed. And so then, to very specifically answer your question now, so we have a track record of like 4 years straight where we've grown our client pool of about 100 practices, 37 to 39% every year. It's kind of weird how it stays within that range. And we definitely do have a bit of a niche within the new owner. So, like, for example, our most common path towards someone getting into our coaching program is through buyer's representation services into coaching. And so we kind of get the benefit of helping them buy the right practice and then helping them grow that practice. And so, kind of the classic. So, like, that's the first thing I'll say is, like, if somebody buys a practice that has 400 patients, for example, like, sure, it's easy to grow that 37 to 39% because it's small, but they're not going to be very happy with their income. And so it's like the first thing that you're looking for is you're looking to get into a position of ownership where there's ample patience, right? So that's like recipe for success number one is get into ownership where a lot of patients are there. And then my favorite avatar of practice to purchase is the one where, yeah, I mean, at the expense of being politically correct, I'm going to be just open. Is like when you talk to a young dentist who takes over this type of practice, they feel like the previous dentist was neglecting the patients. Candidly, I hear that a lot, and so they're like, "Man, I walk in and these patients were a little neglected." And it's like different schools of thought on clinical philosophy. But as somebody gets later in their career, they treat less and less and less. And then you walk into the situation where all of these existing patients have the needs of new patients, right? So like in your career, when you've been seeing people over and over again, you're going to notice a big polarity between your diagnostics of an existing patient and a new patient. A new patient hasn't been to the dentist in 3 or 4 years. They're going to have multiple crowns that they need. They're going to have perio. They're going to have these built up needs. And if you walk into an existing patient base that hasn't seen your type of dentist for 15 years, you know what I mean? That they're all practically new patients. And so you're going to walk in and you're going to have so much dentistry to do, which is going to fuel your practice with cash flow so that you can invest in growth. And so like that's my favorite type of opportunity to find is the one that is just like guys checked out, been checked out for years. Lots of patients consider this their office. They're not regular with their recare. Like all of that leads to you walking in. There's a lot of juice in that lemon to squeeze. You get that cash flow and then you reinvest it in growth. And then to answer your last question, I think one of the things that we do really well at shared practices is we don't treat any two practices the same. And so we have our analytics-based approach that allows us to look into the data to make sure that, for one client, we're focused on case acceptance. That's because it's their biggest opportunity to get the most bang for their buck. And then for another person, we're focused on patient flow. Another person, we're focused on doctor diagnosis, right? So because we use data, we know where to target our efforts. And that's another reason why for 4 years straight, we've been able to, if you look at the data on the 4 years, it's very interesting because some years we were very focused on expanding patient bases with hygiene capacity growth. Other years, we were more focused on case acceptance and doctor diagnosis. And so the formula, the fact that the number 37, 37, 38, 39, like those are the 4 years, the fact that they're so close is really weird because when you look in detail, there's a lot of variance in how we did that. And so I think that it just goes to show that you kind of have to take what's in front of you. The practice presents certain opportunities. And I think we're very fortunate that we help people buy practices with lots of opportunity, and then we help them seize that opportunity, which makes us look good. So I hope that that's like the most long-winded way ever to answer your question.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, no, we were talking about that before we actually hopped on, and we were saying that if you went on a tangent that lasted about an hour after the first question, that'd be perfectly fine.
Well, I'll try to keep them like 5 to 7 minutes at most, but yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. Well, so when you're saying all that, it kind of dawned on me that I believe like right when you came into shared practices, like one of the first people that you kind of had something to do with interviewing was like Derek Williams, wasn't it? Okay. Well, I was going to mention that like when he bought his practice, you had assumed that there wasn't going to be a ton of growth in there. But then what happened was he grew a ton. And the reason is that the previous doctor had been, kind of at the end of his game and was treating stuff just to kind of stay together. And it ended up that there was a ton of treatment out there that needed to be done. And so he was able to grow his practice. And for you, I feel like that was kind of an epiphany moment where you were like, well, there might be a lot more under the surface than just what the general numbers that people usually talk about when they go into buying a practice.
Yeah, so I'll tell you Derek's story. Derek, some of the first episodes of the Shared Practices podcast was Richard interviewing Derek. And Derek told the story of Derek was a third-year dental student when I was a first-year dental student. And him and I became like pen pals. And so we would send each other emails back and forth with all of our dreams and hopes of business and dentistry. And he started the group Ambitious Dental Students on Dental Town, which I joined. And that's kind of how I got involved in the business world of dentists. And so Derek was a fourth year, I was a D2, and he was looking for practices to purchase. So what he would do, because I was a D1 and I'd call broker and I'd say, hey, broker, I would like to look at practices to evaluate. I'm a first year dental student. I see that you have this practice for sale. Can I see the information for it? And they're like, no, like you have no business looking at this. I'm not going to give you the NDA. I'm not going to send you this information. And so I very quickly learned, like, if I wanted to practice looking at practices for sale, I needed a front person to like be the respectable person, to talk to the broker, to get the packet. And then I had to be kind of the behind the scenes person. So I was always looking for these people who were looking to buy practices so that I could have them send them to me so that I could look at them. And so that's what Derek and I did. Is Derek was a fourth year and he would contact the brokers, sign the NDA, get the information, shoot it off to me. I would evaluate it, and then I would send him back my thoughts. And so this practice that he purchased, I was sitting in lecture as I was a second year dental student sitting in the back of my lecture hall, and I'm running this thing on a spreadsheet. And one of the things I looked at is the 3 to 4 fillings surface. Like, so how many MODs do you do compared to how many crowns you do? And that's like one of your telltale signs on how much opportunity there is for basic restorative. And so normally, like a regular dentist who's like young, the way that we would train somebody is going to do like 3 to 4 crowns for every MOD that they do. Like they're going to be doing way more crowns than MODs. This guy, in Derek's situation, was doing 5 MODs for every crown. And so it was just the complete inverse of that regular relationship. And typically you'll see like a 1-to-1 and you'll be like, oh, okay, that's like a good opportunity. And so I saw this one and it was like, he had 2 hygienists worth of patients. So you have 2 existing hygienists doing like 800,000, and the practice was listed for like 400 something. And 2 hygienists worth of patients with that crown to filling ratio. And I was like, and I sent him an email and it was in all caps, buy this practice. And then he went and bought it. And then I called him and we were chatting on the phone and he's like, it's stressful. I walk into this office and these patients have splints. And I'm like, what's a splint? And do you guys know what a splint is?
Well, I just remember, like, I guess the doctor had drilled out like MODs and put like metal in there and then put composite over top.
No. So it's close. So it's when you have teeth that are very weak and they have large needs, you drill all of them out together and you put one big blob of composite so that they're connected to each other to make them stronger. And so he's walking into this practice and there's all of these splints and these other things in there. And it's like, wow, like that's what that looks like. Like I saw it in a spreadsheet and then he's coming in and seeing it in his recare exams. And so that is a real thing, is when you buy the right practice and it's ready to grow like this, then you walk into your hygiene exams and you have to be ready to have direct and open and honest conversations with people. Like there's just no way around it, because you're walking in by design to a situation where somebody has a night and day clinical philosophy as you. And so you have to be in and ready to say, hey, look, like I come from a different school of thought. You know, Dr. X was awesome. I'm sure he was great. But like the reality is that I went to school in the last 5 years and I learned a lot of modern techniques. And so my patients get modern care. And so this is what happened. This is the issue with it. This is what I suggest moving forward. And like you have to you got to go into it knowing that those conversations are the ones that you should be having with people.
Yeah. Well, you kind of touched on it a little bit where you were talking about the hygienist. But another question I had is, you know, when it comes to looking for that ready to grow practice, what specific type of staff are you looking for? Or does that not really matter to you? Like, does it matter that there's a 20-year veteran dental hygienist in there and that 10-year dental assistant in there? Or does that not matter at all? Because if things don't work out, then you'll just hire new ones.
Yeah. So I think that I think the traditional advice on this topic is too conservative. So traditional advice highly emphasizes the importance of retaining the existing team. And so they're going to say that the 20-year hygienist is really important to retain. And I agree that the hygienist is probably one of the more important people to retain. And I would, but like, and people do like to walk in and see familiar faces. Like, there are valid reasons behind those perspectives. But the problem is sometimes people overvalue retaining the existing team to the detriment of establishing their own culture. And so, like, you're going to be so preoccupied with trying to retain the existing people that you're going to be walking on eggshells with the type of practice you're going to want to have. And then you're 2 years in and you're ready to make it your own. And now there's not this natural inflection point for people to behave differently. Versus when you walk in on day one, there is a natural expectation that everything will be different. So you starting with your different philosophy and your approach to ownership gets you more momentum behind your style of practice. And I argue that the pros with starting your way faster are better than the risk of potentially losing team members. And so I think that there's a line to ride there where you want to go in and you want to tell the team, look, like, I'm a different owner, I have a different philosophy, but the reality is that you guys have been here for a long time and you're part of the value that I purchase, and I want to retain as many of you as I can. And so I'm going to be patient with you guys, and we're going to do this together. We're going to make the changes that I want to make, but I'm going to be patient. I'm going to teach you guys, and you're going to learn what it's like to be, in my system. And I think that that type of approach is like kind of a nice middle ground where you're extending the olive branch and trying to keep those long-term team members, but you're making it very clear that the terms of the engagement moving forward are a changed practice with your philosophies, and you're going to move forward with your own sort of way of doing things. Because I think that something that I did and aired on, and I think a lot of people did, is followed this traditional advice where you walk in, you say, I'm not going to change anything for 6 months, and I'm just going to let us all get to know, like, and trust each other, and then we'll go from there. It's like, well, you're just establishing this like normal that is not what you want it to be. I don't think that's the best idea. And one thing I'll say is, so when I bought my practice, they were losing. The fear in all of this is always losing patients, right? Like, that's every fear of why I'm not changing something sooner can be boiled down to losing patients, right? I lose team members, then I lose patients. That's kind of the cascade. And so I walked into my office and they were losing, when I bought my practice as a new grad, they were losing like 40 patients a month. And we were getting 18 new patients a month. So we were net losing 20 people every month. Why? Because their reappointment rate was 65%. So it's like, I pissed off people for sure, and they left the practice. On the count of my hands, I can only think of 5 people that like I pissed off in the way that I operated that left because they didn't like me or because of a change or something. And I'm sure there's more, but there's not 40 people a month that are leaving for that reason. And so every time somebody's like, I'm scared of making a change because I don't want to lose staff that lose patients, I say, well, retain your patients and focus on retention. And now you have a budget of people who you can afford to lose for, like, very commonly, these older practices will have this policy where they'll say that you come in on the day of treatment, you get treatment done, and then we'll mail you a statement. And it's like, that's something doctors need to change pretty quickly. Like, you pay at the time of service, and that's abrasive. And people are like, well, I don't want to lose people. It's like, well, lose someone for that reason. Like, that's a good reason to lose somebody. Like, you need to pay at the time of service. If you want to go get mailed a statement, go somewhere else that has that terrible practice. But at my office, you pay at the time of service, and I will focus on patient retention so that I retain the people who want that practice. And I'm okay with shuffling around some patients that they can go see another provider if someone else is willing to do that. Right. So I think that it's like kind of having that underlying assumption that if you focus on patient retention early, it allows you to lose patients for other reasons that are making the practice your own, which is the best reason to lose patients. Those patients aren't a good fit for your practice, and there's plenty of efficiency.
Yeah. Okay.
I know Elijah and I were talking about this earlier today, just to kind of piggyback off of patient acquisition, patient loss, retention, all of that. Let's say you get into a practice that you love in a bunch of ways, but they're short on patients by 10 or 15%.
Yeah.
Or just what you said, whatever your practices are could be in stark contrast. They're abrasive to staff or patients. For whatever reason, you're either losing patients or not bringing in enough every month. We've had a lot of people on who say they've tried different ways of marketing, different ways of reaching out. And I think Elijah and I I'm sure Ben would agree as well, but it seems like the golden standard these days, no matter what, is to get a lot of reviews and to have a lot of good reviews. But the question kind of poses in my mind is that if I have three practices that all have 4,000 reviews and they're all at 4.7, 4.9 stars, they're all pretty highly rated. There still has to be some kind of a differentiating factor. And so how are you approaching that in the modern dentistry? If everybody has great reviews, that's not necessarily a selling point anymore. That's a way to stay competitive. Are you marketing on social media? Are you hoping that word of mouth is enough for you? And then how do you determine in this practice, in this demographic, how you market to try and get patient acquisition?
Okay, so I'm going to ask you some questions, Josh. What are your goals and where do you want to go geographically?
I think we've all talked about this a couple times. Ideally, I would like to be somewhere in Florida.
Okay, and somewhere in Florida means there's like 10 different types of markets in Florida. So help me narrow that down a little bit.
Well, I guess we haven't really necessarily decided anywhere. We have, I'd say, a couple of years to go at least, but somewhere probably west coast of Florida, could be around Tampa, could be in the Panhandle, likely just on the Gulf side of Florida somewhere, with the final goal of practice ownership.
Great. So what I'll tell you is within Florida, there are parts of the state where this conversation is relevant. And then there's parts of the state where this conversation is irrelevant. And so I always try to encourage people to go to geographies where they have an access to care advantage. So there are certain parts of Florida, more inland, smaller towns, secondary, tertiary markets instead of the primary markets, right? Like maybe you live in a nice big city, but you drive 45 minutes each way on a highway to your practice that's more in an underserved area. Like that's how you go to a place where this doesn't matter. And I think that before we even get into the other side of the conversation, we have to talk about the fact that access to care. So like in my career, one of the things that has really progressed is my appreciation for the access to care dynamic. Like it is just so much easier to be located physically in a place where you are needed compared to a place where you are abundant and there's abundant amount of competition. So let's just ask your question again. It's like, if you're in a smaller town, the reality is the practice with 4,000 reviews won't be able to see anybody for the next 7 months. So other people need to go somewhere else. So if you have availability and you can provide access to care in a place that doesn't have access to care, you will have patients. So if you have a practice that has the proper facility and it just doesn't have the proper patient base, but it's in a low access to care area, then I would know that with me as an operator, I'm going to bring in providers and have availability and market, and I'll get patients, right? So your question needs to be forked to, is this an access to care place, or is this a place where it's competitive and there's more care than there is patients who need care? So then you go to your bigger markets, right? And your bigger markets, yeah, totally, right? Google reviews, SEO, pay-per-click. Like you start playing in the, what do they call it? The red ocean, blue ocean, right? So you start like, you're in the red ocean now, right? Like where you're competing with everyone else. And so, yeah, I mean, there's very different value props and different models, right? So it's like you can have one model where you open up a startup and you try to provide a unique patient experience. Now you have a genuine, unique differentiator in the marketplace that you market for. Most people don't do that. Most people are just like I have this patient base. I have this referral network. But the other thing I'll say is one of the most successful strategies that I've seen with people in saturated areas is let's just say, the thing that you really can't compromise on is number of operatories. So you really need to find an opportunity with the proper facility. But then once you get that, what you can do is you can import a merger. So it's like you go to your area, you get there, there's not enough patients. It's a competitive area. So then you start hitting up all of the dentists within 5 to 7 miles of your practice that are older, and you start exploring mergers so that you can port them into your practice and their patients and kind of get that big shot in the arm to get to where you want to go. And so to answer your question in long words, access to care, no access to care. If access to care is an advantage that you have where you're in a rural or semi-rural area, then just get the facility, provide the access to care, and trust that that dynamic will work in your favor. If you're in a competitive area, you can do a startup with a unique value prop, or you can acquire a practice with a large enough facility, and then you're looking for chart mergers or some other things. And then with marketing, there's always marketing is Google reviews bake over time. SEO is more or less unpredictable. Anyone who tells you otherwise is questionably honest. And pay-per-click is tried and true but expensive. And then direct mail is ineffective in big markets. That's kind of like the general thing. And so you're really looking at reviews, referrals, pay-per-click, and then that's why I like chart mergers and those types of things, because trying to get patients in a competitive market is just tough. And I've seen people have success on Facebook. I've seen people have success on TikTok. I think social media is a growing avenue, but it's just not one that I find to be predictable for 1,000 people to try. And so that's why I don't talk about it a lot, but I know a lot of people that have had success with it. I just don't know how to replicate it for 1,000 people.
So whenever you're evaluating practices in terms of like saturation, do you like to use demographics, or do you have your own kind of sources that you use?
Yeah, I mean, at this stage, we have our own tools. So like, do I use demographics for my own, like for our own use? No, because we have custom software. But if there's a third-party vendor that I would want anyone to use, it's Dentographics. Yeah, I think that they're pretty clearly the best at this in the space.
Okay, so what are you all using that kind of sets you apart from Dentographics?
Proprietary tool. So we're at the stage where we have 46 offices that all do the same thing. And so we have a proprietary tool that it was custom developed for us that looked at all of our practices and found the commonalities and spit out a predictive model. So that's just not something that's publicly available. And if you could tell, all of a sudden the amount that I'm sharing went like way down, because that's like a trade secret. So yeah.
Yeah, no, totally understandable. I know earlier whenever we were talking about kind of some of the different things you had seen with that specific practice with like the splints and everything. I know in your book, Dental Moneyball Zero, you talk about how those kinds of red flags are now, you're kind of turning it around to where you see it as more of an opportunity and it's more potential now. One of the questions I had was, how do you differentiate between a practice that just is very low on patients or does have potential versus a practice that is small because it really is broken and there really is no hope for it? Or are there practices that simply don't have hope? Like, is that even a thing, or does every practice have at least a shot at being able to grow?
Yeah, so it's all about the facility first and foremost, right? So a 3-operatory facility, its future is a chart merger, right? Like those ones, they need to go to the pasture. But then I would say that there are 6 operatory facilities with an adjacent space next door. Those could become 10 to 12. That has a future. And so I think facility is going to be your first pass at that. Is, do I have the physical space? Because I think, let's just kind of be honest here. The single doctor model is dying. Like the idea that you are going to be in a practice as the only dentist seeing patients means that like those are going to become increasingly fee for service. Those people, right? Because that's just the future of that type of practice. Like the work by myself, have the whole staff, have 4 to 6 operatories, take insurance. That practice is that's a dying office in terms of where dentistry is going. You don't have economies of scale. You don't have patient relationships that are monetized in a fee-for-service way. So like those guys are either going to get bought, merged, or go fee-for-service, in my opinion. And so like I tend to come at it from the perspective that your group practice is sort of the future model. Is like private practice is really like I own a practice and I have an associate. Like I really believe that is sort of the modern version of private practice ownership. It's going to have a lot more people who employ associates in private practice in the future. And so when I look at this question, I'm looking at it from a group practice viability lens. And so you need like probably a minimum of 7 operatories to be viable as a group, in my opinion. And so like 6, you can make it work, but it's just not comfortable. And so 7, you can make it work comfortably long-term. And there's people that have proven me wrong on this, but I continue to stick by my numbers on those. And so I think that the first question is the facility viable? Yes or no? Second question is, if the facility is viable, can I get patients here enough to fill the facility? And that's where the access to care thing comes back, where it's like, if you have a 7 operatory facility, but it's like very underutilized and it's in a rural area, then I'd be like, yeah, this is no brainer. This thing is going to take off. Versus if it's like in one of the most competitive markets in the country, like, maybe the upper income part of Los Angeles, for example, it's like, if this thing has 7 operatories and 300 patients, I don't know if they can get the other patients there. So it's not viable, right? So it's all about, first, is the facility viable? And then second is, are we going to be able to get the patients to fill the facility? And then everything else, I think, is just hiring and training and running a good practice.
Okay.
So straight out of dental school, you mentioned a lot on the podcast that, the thing that took the biggest hit out of everything was your clinical skill set, pretty much. And you didn't get to invest a lot of time into that because you were investing a lot of time into the business side of things. And so when somebody graduates dental school, do you have like a preferable buffer period before they go and try to buy a dental practice? And how long is that buffer period? And during that buffer period, what should that specific student be trying to do? Like CE, certain other
you're
things.
Like talking to the gung-ho person who wants to get in ownership ASAP, correct? Yeah.
Yes.
So look, I did this. I got in right out of school. And I'm just going to speak to my experience so that you guys can understand why I regretted it a little bit. So like funding for that's really challenging. And so I ended up funding with a combination of seller financing and a bank that gave me a loan. But like I wasn't able to acquire a large practice. My practice was large. It was like $1 million, but like I wasn't able to get like a $2 million 10-op office, for example, or something like that. And so, so the 2 biggest procedure mixes that you want to be very comfortable with are surgical extractions and endo. Those are the 2. And the reason why is because you want to be able to, if you are in your own practice and your patient has a problem, it's very annoying when the solution is a referral. Like, let's just say you are prepping a crown or something and it goes unexpected and now the tooth is non-restorable. And now you have like a major negative goodwill incident with the patient. Now you've got to refer them to the specialist who's going to charge them $800 to take out the tooth and graft. And now your negative goodwill is even more. And so just having the ability to get the patient numb, take the tooth out, graft the socket, and say, look, this was my bad. Like, I'm going to make it right with you. Those types of things make ownership go smoother. And then also, from a productivity standpoint, handling the emergency visit, it's like, emergency comes in, I write a referral to the endodontist, and I send them on their way. Like, I made no money in that incident, right? Versus emergency patient comes in, I did a build-up and crown and a root canal. That's $2,000, right? So it's like, that's a big difference. And so I think that endo surgical extraction mix is endo surgical extractions and speed. Those are like the things that it's nice to have before you walk in. And the reason why I know is because I didn't have any. Actually, I had speed. So I've always been fast. And I think that that's kind of been my, like, so in D2 year, we had 11 practicals and I finished first in 7 of them. And like, I was racing. And so like, that was my thing.
Sounds
was
like Josh.
I was trying to be fast. And like, there was a couple other kids that were trying to be fast. And so like, we would always like kind of do that. And so like, that was always my thing, was clinical speed from clinic and on. And so I feel like I got that one in school. So when I graduated, I was like kind of imposter syndrome walking into the practice, and my assistant, we cut our first crown prep. She's like, whoa, that was quick. And like, that was my first crown prep in private practice. And I was like, it's kind of funny. I felt like I dunked around forever and like, I had no idea what I was doing. And so I feel like speed was never my problem. My issue was specialty procedures, endo and extractions. My first extraction, I sent it out to have them finish it because I couldn't finish it. And then my first root canal, I perfed. And it was like after that, I was just so timid that I was like, look, this is just too much stress. I can't take these things on anymore. And versus, so your first, I'll be honest, your first 4 months out, 4 to 6 months out, depending on how fast of a learner you are, those are kind of tough months, I'll be honest. Like, it just, you guys, any of you guys are in clinic yet?
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys remembered your first like few months in clinic. It kind of has this like blur feeling of like, every day I'm stressed. Every day I'm doing something new. Every day I don't know what I'm doing a little bit too much. It's like your first 4 to 6 months out kind of feel like that. And like when we on the other side are hiring associates, we have the thought of like, not sure I want to be the place where they are for their first 4 to 6 months. Because there's just candidly the highest mistake rate that you'll make in your careers in your first 4 to 6 months. And so like for me, I had to replace a lot of fillings. I had to, redo some crowns. Like, I had to fix my own first 4 to 6 months. And so going to a place for your first 4 to 6 months is my suggestion. And going to a place, my favorite places are the low income dental clinics that are high volume. Those are the best. Like, and everyone gets turned off by these opportunities because the fees suck and they pay a small percentage and they just like slam you with Medicaid. But you get so much reps and volume at those types of places. And so like bunch of endo, tons of extractions. Cause like in my state, at least, Medicaid for adults covers emergency visits only. So it's like if somebody needs an endo or an extraction, it'll cover it. But like they don't cover like just getting all of their stuff handled. And so like those places in particular, you get a high volume of emergency care. And so a high volume of emergency care and a high volume of patients. So you get your speed, your surgical extractions, and your endo. Like those are the things I would focus on. And then once you get into ownership, then you can kind of transition your mindset into the private practice patient who's wanting to prevent those things from happening and wants to, is willing to have a mouthful of crowns instead of a mouthful of cracked amalgams that will surprise them at various times. And so like, that it's a mindset shift getting into practice ownership, but it's easier to have that mindset shift than it is to walk into ownership not knowing how to do surgical extractions or not feeling comfortable in endo or not being fast enough. Like those ones, I would rather you figure those out in your first 4 to 6 months. And look, I mean, I say that, and there's going to be tons of people that just buy a practice anyway. And like, there's just certain people that are so determined to do it that you just won't be able to talk them out of it. But I think that I think that the other thing I'll say is that I didn't get as large of a loan as I could have. And I think that if I had 4 to 6 months of good experience, I could have had a bank that would have been more willing to fund me for something bigger. And I could have gone for like a larger practice with more operatories. I did fine. I have 8, but like I could have had 10 or 12. And I think that, and I could have bought 3,000 patients instead of 1,800. Right. And so like I could have put myself in a position where I had a faster path to 3 million. And so, those are some of my thoughts.
So if you were to go that route where you would go and work somewhere for 4 to 6 months and say you don't get paid that well, does the bank not really care too much about how much money you have set aside, as long as it's like at least the minimum amount, which is like what, 5% of the down payment or 5% of the total cost or whatever?
Yeah, they want you to have like 6 months living expenses liquidity, and it'll vary based on the bank that you talk to. But it's more about your production. So it's more about like, how much am I producing? What type of volume can you handle? Those are going to be some of the more important things. So like, let's just say you go to a bank and they're like, well, you don't make very much. You'd be like, yeah, well, I produced 800,000 in the last 6 months, but the fees at this practice suck so bad that like I only got to keep this much, but you put me in an office with these fees and look what I'm going to produce, right? So you have a counterpoint to that you can use your production figures to show, even though the collections might be small, you have the production to back it up.
Ben, what else you got?
One question I had, it's a little bit off topic, but obviously with the title of your book being Moneyball, I didn't know if you had picked up inspiration from the movie Moneyball. And what that was like while you were writing it.
Oh, yeah. So I don't know. You guys know that this is my second book called Moneyball, right? I have the first one, right? Yeah. So we got Dental Moneyball, the original, and then we have Dental Moneyball Zero. So my inspiration, great question. So I don't know if you guys know Daryl Morey. So the basketball version of Moneyball is called Moneyball. And so Daryl Morey was hired as the general manager of the Rockets in 2012. And he came from MIT. He had not really had the proper background. Everyone's like, what is this guy doing? And at the time, I was in college and I studied the regular pre-dental stuff. I did like MCB physio. I had a double major, but like I also was taking a bunch of math classes in college out of pure interest. Like I really like math. And so for me, I would spend my free time on YouTube watching analytics on how the NBA is changing. And like I've been a huge basketball nut my whole life. And so like watching the videos about how they were starting to understand basketball differently, when I got into the business of dentistry, I started to see a lot of analogies. So for example, basketball players, they have a points per attempt. So it's like every time they shoot, every player has a net points per attempt. So it's like the way that it works is star ball is that the best players shoot the most because they're the most efficient. So it makes sense for the team to give them the most attempts. And so for every shot that you shoot, there is a predicted points per attempt. So when they look NBA teams at the end of their games, they look at what was the actual score, but then they looked at what was the predicted score. So like how quality of our attempts, how good of a job did we do with our shot selection? Now, what's the dental analogy of that? Is diagnosis out of hygiene, right? Every dentist has a like dollars diagnosed per hygiene exam. And it's like, if you were to put the four of us in the same exact 100 hygiene exams and we were to walk out, there's a certain amount of treatment that each of us would schedule as a result of that. And it's all based on our clinical abilities, what we see, what we diagnose, the way that we explain it to patients, the way that we co-diagnose with our teams, right? So it's like the way that we outperform each other is based on a bunch of systems. And so I started to see all of these analogies between the dental business and how you can use analytics and data to understand the intricacies at a deeper level, and sports with how they were investing in analytics departments and all of these things to drive their team's performance. And the funny thing is, analytics work over a season. They don't work in a particular game. And it's very similar. It's like this analytics-based approach in practice management works over the course of a 6-month window or a 12-month window, not a one day, you try this out and you're going to make a bunch of money. That's not really our philosophy. And so, I think that it's just the way that I got interested in this was through basketball. And then when I got into dental, I started to realize, like when I was looking at all those practices for purchase, one of the things I always looked at was the hygiene percentage, right? So you have a practice that has 34% hygiene and you plug in a new doc, that doc is going to have 25% hygiene. And then that practice just grew by however much diagnostics and production had to happen to dilute and have the same amount of hygiene production, but have the percentage be 25 instead of 34. And so I started to realize that dentists walk around with a hygiene percentage on their head. Mine was like 27 to 28%. That was like my hygiene percentage for my career, because I had hygiene productivity. So like I got my hygienist to boost, but then I also did fillings, crowns, night guards. I didn't do a ton of extra stuff. So I wasn't able to bring my hygiene percentage down. Right. So I think it's like, you kind of just realize. And then, when I think of like associates, I always think of like when teams are giving players contracts in sports, they are always trying to do value above replacement. So like if I hire the minimum player that's abundant, that I can get 100 of these guys, how much more valuable is this person than that person? And that's how associates are. It's like, it's all about the value above replacement. So it's like, if you have an associate and they want equity, or they want profit sharing, or they want something above a regular associate gig, you ask the question, how hard is it for me to replace you? And how much more valuable are you compared to the replacement? And that then is how you make the decision on what to do with the doctor equity model for that person. And so it's like, I've always used sports and the way that they make decisions in sports and compared that to dentistry, and has allowed me to make decisions in dentistry. And so for me, it was the only title that made sense was Dental Moneyball. And, it started as a book, but now it's turning into a book series. But it's all that same concept, right? It's using data and analytics to help dentists make money, owning and operating their dental practices intelligently.
Right. I think that's very cool. I didn't know there was a basketball story behind that too, because I'd obviously been into like the baseball aspect of it, but yeah, there is a basketball on the cover. So yes, that makes sense now. I was wondering.
And I'm just going to get up for just a second, which I don't think I've ever done.
Okay.
He's going to get a basketball.
Here we
Is
go.
he wearing North Carolina gym shorts?
So I actually have a dental money ball. So there is an actual basketball in my office that has dental money ball on it. So for me, this is very much a basketball thing.
Okay, gotcha.
That's
very
awesome.
Nice. Yeah,
I believe it was you that did a lunch and learn at UK last year as well, not only this year. And so they had books up front, and I was a D1 last year. And so I walked up front. I didn't even know they were giving away books. I was like, is this book free? And they were like, yeah, you can take it. So I took the book and I read it. And that's pretty much what sent me down this rabbit hole. So I knew there was the basketball background to it, but I liked it so much I tried to get my wife to read the book, and she's not even in dental school.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, so if you were wondering if the pizza was well spent at UK, well, you at least got me, and then I dragged these two guys down with me.
Yeah,
so.
It's funny. Whenever you do any type of promotional event in a dental school, you're banking on like a 3 to 5 year return on investment cycle for that investment. And so it's one of those things that we just plant seeds, and I think that from our perspective, we feel like we have a good message, which is dental school is expensive, and they don't really ever teach you how to pay it back. Like we teach you how to get debt, but then like, what do you do with that? And I think that there's kind of this question facing the industry right now, which is what percentage of practices are going to be privately owned? And, I think that as consolidation goes, that number continues to get smaller. So when I was in dental school, they would say it was 50-50. When I started dental school, they said it would be 50-50. And they said it would be like optometry, which is roughly 50-50. And now, in my sort of DSO circles, they say 80-20. And so in a matter of 10 years, 12 years, the amount of consolidation that we thought would occur appears to be much more. And so what's the antidote to that, or what's the other side to that, is why is this happening? Well, this is happening because dentists do not know how to effectively run their businesses the way that MBAs and sophisticated business owners do. And so there's this opportunity in the marketplace where a DSO cannot deliver the type of doctor-patient relationship that a private practice owner can. It's just impossible. And so they are able to overcome that disadvantage by how big of an advantage they have on how much better they know how to own and operate the business than you. And so how do we level the playing field? Well, we got to teach all of the dentists how to own and operate their businesses effectively so that they can then offer the best option, right? The best practices continue to be the ones where there's a strong sense of ownership on site, and it is a doctor-patient relationship where there's continuity of care, and it's a well-run, efficient, profitable business. And I still think that private practice done extremely well with a very sophisticated owner is capable of delivering a better business and a better patient experience than most of the average DSO out there that is consolidating the marketplace. And do I think that there's certain DSOs that are excellent? Totally. But do I think that it's significantly harder to run tens of 20s of hundreds of offices than it is to run one? Yeah, I know from experience it is. And so it's just one of those things that the gap right now is that dentists don't really know what to do and how to do it. And so I think that I feel like I have a bit of a point to my career on trying to close that gap. And so happy to, like I mentioned before, right? Like, when we got on this podcast, I said the same thing. I said, like, I have a passion for the business-minded dental student because you guys are carrying the torch. Like, my first book, I dedicated it to the next generation of dental entrepreneur, which is you guys. And then the next book, I also dedicated it to the next generation of dentist entrepreneur who's going to privately own their practice. Also you guys. And so, like, I feel like it's up to you guys to, you know, carry the torch here and really do that well. And the one thing I'll say is, you know, like, I think this question naturally leads into why did you start at DSO? And I feel like, you know, in my career, right, like, I had this moment where I was sitting in this seminar and I became very clear on the fact, yeah, so why is consolidation this unstoppable force? Well, it's this unstoppable force because there are billions of dollars every year being invested into dentistry from Wall Street. A little less now than there used to be, I'll be honest. The market's cooled off on dentistry. But that money is coming in, and it is, nobody in this industry can stop it. And so you have a choice. And you have a choice on, do I sit here and scream on the sidelines and tell people, like, you know, to not participate? Or do I go out and start a DSO with the idea in mind of trying to be an example of how this can be done well? And I feel like Shared Practices Group, we've done a good job of that. Like, we have a value proposition to patients, to team members, to doctors that I believe in. I feel like we offer doctors a really great opportunity. I think that we have strong leaders on site, you know, and, like, obviously we have 46 locations. So at any given time, maybe there's a few stores that I don't feel like that way about, but we have identified them and we're working on it. Right. So it's one of those things that, like, it's, yeah. And so it's one of those things, it's an unavoidable nature of our industry, but I still want to continue to be the person to encourage people to take the risk to own their own private practice, but they have to be, and this is the other message in the book that, Ben, I think you probably got to, is you have to be very intentional about it. Like, the days of hanging a shingle and not caring about your practice and making a good amount of money are gone. Like, if you don't want to be committed to ownership, there's many DSO opportunities out there for you that are going to make you good money. Like, DSOs specialize in making a dentist $300,000 to $400,000. And so it's like, if that's what you want and you don't want to work hard for it, and you don't want to, like, not saying work hard, but you don't want to work on the business hard, then that's there. But for everyone else that wants to take that risk and really be intentional, it requires more than it used to, but the opportunity is still there.
Yeah, I mean, that's great stuff. So something that you said at the very beginning that just shocked me was that 30 to 40% of dentists who are associates make more than the average business dental owner. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the actual stat is, and this isn't a statistic that's been published, it's my own anecdotal experience. So take that for what it's worth. But yeah, I mean, it's, so a lot of people are in, if you are in a high paying associate position, and you leave. And when I say high paying associate position, I'm talking touching 300 or more. So like once you're above 250, getting close to 300K, and you go into ownership, there is a high chance that you will go down in income, not up. And I think that that is a trend that I have seen more and more, and it has shocked me because, and it's always been the exact same prototype. Like this isn't like, I don't know why this is happening. It's these doctors who buy single doctor offices in competitive areas. Like that's the playbook on how to make less. Like these people, they go and they buy these 4-op practices, 5-op practices, single hygienist in a major market, top 15 metro in the country, and they're not doing as good as they used to, and then they're sitting there pissed off. It's funny. There's a mix. Some of them are pissed, and others are honestly, they're liking ownership and they like being in control and they don't mind making less, which I was surprised by as well.
Yeah. I mean, I was just going to say the question I had going off of that was going to be like, what would your pitch be to somebody who is an associate that kind of is on the fence of maybe, do I want to go in ownership? Maybe I don't. But I mean, kind of minute 47 of this through about minute 55 was pretty much your pitch.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, like to me, I'm sold on it, but if you, that is a tough step. If you have to say, well, I'm making, really, really good money right now. Am I going to be willing to go through, but then you think about where we're at right now, where we have absolutely no money at all. So, if you approach it from that mindset, then, it's, I think the opportunity that is there is just too good to pass up if you have, the urge to run your own thing.
Yeah. And I would say that like shared practices initial iteration, we started the podcast back in 2016, was everyone should be an owner. And like the industry's just changed. You no longer can say that. And I think that so your standpoint is a couple points here. It's like, yeah, it's good to get into ownership when you're still on the ramen noodles diet, right? Like when you're like, when you're a dental student and things are tight. I remember when I was a dental student and things were tight, I was living on like $4,000 a month or something like that. It was like, I had a pretty slim budget. And then when I graduated and I became an owner and I started making some dentist money, my lifestyle didn't immediately change all that much. And it was like money just started to accumulate in my checking account. And then I had a 6-month period where I didn't make any money. I write about it in the first book. And so that was very helpful to not have had these bloated expenditures. It was like maybe I was spending $5,000 to $6,000 a month at that point. Like I bloated a little, but nothing crazy. And it was like my bank account would just kind of go down gradually from the money I accumulated in the first while. And like that was kind of nice to have the ability to sit there and have a 6-month period where I didn't get paid and be okay. And I think that like if you ramp up your lifestyle with an associateship and then you get into ownership, well, now you're kind of like used to spending a certain amount of money. It's a little harder. So I think that there's definitely a merit to getting in early and having, because there's always that period, right? Where it's like, if you leave one thing to go to another thing, there's going to be that period where you're going to maybe take a dip temporarily and then hopefully recover to where you were before or better. And so doing that without having that previous experience of making 300K per year is kind of nice.
Yeah. Well, we greatly appreciate your time and we want to respect it. So if you got to go, we're more than happy to let you go.
Maybe I'll close with a round of takeaways. So I think for me, takeaways is like, they say that a brand is a promise, something I learned from my experience in marketing. And, my promise is that when you're on a call with me, we do takeaways. And so maybe we'll go around and you guys can share your takeaways from our time together. So maybe we'll start with Ben, we'll go to Josh, and then we'll end with Elijah, and then I'll go last.
Sure. Yeah. So I think one thing you touched on earlier in the podcast that I'm really going to hone in on as I try to expand my clinical skill set is if your solution is a referral, then you have a problem. So I think that is obviously key to your practice, like you talked about with learning how to do endo and surgical extractions, just expanding our skill sets as we continue on, as we're only D2s now. So hopefully we can get more experience. Obviously, we'll be limited with what we can do by the time we graduate, but whenever we get out into the real world and start practicing on more and more patients, getting up our speed, and then also just trying to get as many different types of procedures under our belt, that'll be key to our success.
Yeah, and I think the thing I'll tell you is, you're limited in terms of what you can do, but you're not limited in terms of how many YouTube videos you can watch or how many articles you can read. Like, I was a real nerd on, clinical dentistry in my D2 and D3 years. I really soaked it up. And so, there's things you can do preclinical that will help you when you get there. Josh.
I think it's hard for me to decide. I have two.
Go for it.
I would say the first one is how you kind of framed the fork in the road, if you will, of the whole patient acquisition and retention. I've heard it phrased in that way before, but I would say never kind of the analogy that you ran between a rural or semi-rural and an urban area, and how you need to approach that just fundamentally differently. And to really know your practice or your potential practice going in to that, I think is huge. And then the second one is, how many points per attempt do I get? You said your percentage was like 27, 28%, and you thought you could have dropped it lower had you had, a stronger foundation in other areas of dentistry. Is bread and butter dentistry shifting? I think it is. Obviously we're moving from crown and bridge to implant, probably more by the second, where the general dentist has more patients that they're referring, or that they're not referring out for, single or a couple implant case, or even some dentists running, all on X or full mouth rehabs. I think that's going to be a huge takeaway for, how can we increase our points per attempt? How can we increase our billings per, hygiene? Really work those percentages as best as we can.
So one thing I'll tell you is, I remember when I was a dental student, Howard Ferrand was like kind of somebody that I would listen to. And one thing he talked about a lot was like go rural, don't be in the big city. And like, I kind of just brushed it off a little bit, I'll be honest. I'm like, okay, this guy's just like, I don't know. He lives in Phoenix and he's telling me to go rural. Like, what is this? And it's one of those things that in my career, I have appreciated it more and more, is being in a place with not enough access to care and providing access to care is simply the best business. Like, it just is. And so I think that that's something that as time has gone on, I have appreciated that fundamental more and more. And so it's kind of grown in volume in terms of how I think about it with the years that have passed. So I'm happy you picked that one up. And then Elijah.
Yeah, mine kind of stems from one of the questions that Ben asked you, but facilities leads to patients, and then patients leads to ultimately what you're able to produce. And so, like you touched on how kind of the way to not make more money than what you were making as an associate is to go buy a 3-op practice. Yeah. So if you're looking to get into ownership, you've got to go at least 6 ops. And then, maybe up to 7 or 8. And then if you want to really, really grow, you're going to have probably at least 12. And so, that's, I personally would like to be in a sort of group practice situation where, I'm not on my own. I've got people I can bounce ideas off of, but also, for the business point of it too, like it lowers overhead. And, if I'm off, then maybe the other doctor could be on. And then, I think everything just works better when you have more facilities, more room for patients. And then that gives you honestly more room for error.
Totally.
So that's my takeaway.
That's awesome. And I think I remember when I was a D4, I was looking at my practice, 8 ops, and my plan was to go solo actually initially. I wasn't planning on having a group practice, like the most out of touch plan. And I remember I was like, is 8 ops too much? Is this too much space for just me? And I remember I was talking to somebody and they were like, you will never regret having too many operatories. And it's like the most true thing I've ever heard. Like, you will never regret extra ops. Always a good problem. So no matter how many there are, it's always good that there's that many, if not more. So yeah, my takeaway, guys, is where I started. Like, I think that what you guys are doing is awesome. And I think that I remember I was a dental student doing what you guys are doing, right? So it's like, I can relate to it. It's needed. And dental students need to be aware of the fact that they need to get started learning about business sooner than later. They all think that they can kick the can down the road until they graduate. And that is just not the truth. And so there needs to be people out there that are shaking the shoulders of the others to say, hey, guys, we need to start thinking about business. We are in an economy. We need to make money. We have to pay back our loans. We have to have a good lifestyle. This needs to be worth it. So like, let's all get behind this. And so I think that my takeaway is that it's just really refreshing and nice to spend some time with you guys. And so appreciate you guys having me on your podcast, and appreciate the questions as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hope you guys enjoyed that episode of the Shared Practices podcast. And yeah, it was a fun one with Elijah and the other guys at the Business Minded Dentist podcast. And if you guys like this episode, or you have any questions regarding it, email us at team@sharedpractices.com. I thought they brought up some really great points. And I think that you see through kind of the entire conversation the value of buyer's representation services, right? It was very clear that they were kind of taken aback by the amount of people that get into ownership and don't have more financial success than they did as associates. And, you know, kind of the antidote to that, or the way that you take care of that proactively, is that you buy the right practice with plenty of financial opportunity. And that's what buyer's representation services is really all about. It's about finding practices that allow you to have financial success right away. And so if you're interested in buyer's representation services, I encourage you to go to sharedpractices.com, look up our buyer's representation services, or if you're in ownership, our coaching services, where we help practices grow 37 to 39% year over year. So thanks for listening to another episode of the Shared Practices podcast. I hope you enjoyed the interview, and we'll see you next time on the show.